Welcome to the Financial Deviant Podcast. Excited for another episode and hope you gain something out of it. And again, let me start out by thanking you guys for the support that you have given over the first several months of this podcast being live. I'm very grateful for the encouragement and for the positive feedback that I've received up to this point. I want to start out today's episode by talking a little bit about my background. And when I say background, I'm specifically referring to my background growing up in church, and some of the things that were taught as it relates to money and personal finance, and some of the things that were taught that were the way to be blessed financially. And so I wanted to start out by talking about that a little bit because I can tell you from my experience, a lot of things that were taught were probably not absolutely accurate. And again, I can tell you from my experience, I can't necessarily talk about everybody else's, but I can absolutely tell you what my experience has been. First of all, the Bible talks about the earth being the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And so my approach to even money is, I guess probably the best word you could think of is stewardship. The Bible has a lot to say about money. And quite frankly, I think if we would pay attention to what the Bible says about money and the management of money, we would be better off in many cases. Unlike what some people have said, God is not a hater of wealth. And, there's no doubt that he warns us about making wealth the center of our life, almost like he warns us about making money a God in our lives. That is true. But the Bible talks a lot about us being stewards. Everything that we have, he has given it to us. And that's kind of my approach. That's kind of why I approach things the way I do, because that responsibility to not just be a consumer, but to be in a situation where you can be a blessing to other people and where you give freely, the blessing is there. But let me give you an example of some of the things that I have heard over the years that I just want to kind of touch on. And one of them is this whole idea that there being a financial blessing for participating in particular offerings. That was one, and probably one you still hear today is, okay, if you do this, if you give this amount, then this is what God's going to do. That type of thing. The problem is those special offerings came around about every week. And quite frankly, there was very little evidence that what was being said was true. Another one was, this admonishment to, by faith is what was said. Go out and do this, go buy a car, go do this, because you got to look the part before you are the part. Even in most cases, if you got to go into debt to get it. And that kind of thing was said, and it was called faith. I would call it something else, but faith is not how I would describe it. That kind of thing is what I'm referring to. And even situations where you were admonished to borrow money from a neighbor who might be sitting next to you in church just so you can participate in this very special offering. That is so ironic that literally you're being asked to go into debt in order to receive a blessing. I haven't found anywhere in the Bible where that's supported, but those are the kinds of things that I'm referring to. And let me say this. My real progress came when I started doing some other things that the Bible talks about, and things like getting out of debt, spending less than I made, saving or investing the leftovers. That's when I really started to make immediate and significant progress, when I started to use the mind that God gave me to be disciplined to make wiser, better decisions. There's a verse in the Bible, Proverbs 13:7, that talks about the one guy who pretends to be wealthy and really has nothing, and another guy who looks like they don't have much, but they actually do. There's a lot of us that can learn from that one verse. There's a lot of people trying to look like they have something when they don't, because they think that's what they should do. They have to look the part before they are the part. That is, again, that's not when I saw my progress. Following all those kinds of things, they didn't really yield anything for me. When I started disciplining myself and setting up parameters on spending, and actually feeling some strain because of my efforts to limit my spending, that is when I started to make some progress. I am well aware, as a believer, that God is sovereign and he can do anything. But I'm also well aware that God gave us a mind that we're created in his image. And he never asked us to totally eliminate our ability to think. So I hope you enjoyed that little opening. But I want to move on to something else. One of the guys that I have read and have followed a little bit over the years, a guy that you guys are very familiar with, I'm sure, and that's Dave Ramsey. And Dave Ramsey has caught some flack for several things, but one thing people cannot argue about is how he has helped to get millions of people out of debt and off to a much better financial start. There's no argument about that. Personally, I don't necessarily subscribe to his investment philosophy, but that doesn't mean I throw out everything that he's taught, because it's absolutely helped me over the years. But Ramsey Solutions, they do these surveys like every quarter, and it's just about the financial state of people in this country. And some very interesting information that they come up with. Like, again, they do it every quarter. So the latest one came out, and I thought some of the numbers were pretty interesting. Like, for instance, more than 1 in 3 Americans making $100,000 or more are living paycheck to paycheck. Americans continue to have little to no savings. Over a third, or exactly 34%, have no savings at all. Credit card usage is on the rise. 40% of Americans say that they're using a credit card more often than any other form of payment. That's staggering. About a quarter of Americans are taking on more credit card debt than normal. 24% exactly. Let's see what else we had here. Americans have little to no savings. I actually mentioned that. The paycheck to paycheck cycle is no doubt is a contributing factor to Americans' lack of savings. The two go hand in hand. Only about half of Americans have $1,000 or more in savings. The actual number is 49%. And that is up. It was 45% of folks had no savings. Now it's 49%. Americans are taking on more debt. Let's see here. This says that credit card usage is on the rise. 40% saying they use credit card. Okay, that's one I just read, actually. Let's get on down here. There is some more interesting, talking about the impact on mental health, how financial stress impacts mental health. The stresses of an uncertain financial future can have debilitating effect on a person's mental health. This says that depending on the severity of the situation, people often feel helpless, isolated, and frustrated by money issues. A little more than half of Americans, 54%, feel like they're barely treading water and that they can't get ahead with their finances. This is some of the reasons that I started this podcast, just in case I could help some people start to think differently about some of this stuff. And I know there are some contributions or some contributors to these situations that may be out of your control personally, but my focus from the very beginnings has been for us to make decisions that put ourselves in a better situation, that give us a better opportunity um, to live through and work through those times when things are difficult, those times when things aren't flowing like we want them to. We talk about mental health and stress. Financial stress, as we all know, can lead to a lack of sleep. Yeah, the research they did said that 41% of Americans said they lost sleep in the previous 3 months due to money troubles. 41% lost sleep because of concerns about their personal finances. There's some more stuff down here that I want to share with you. Let's see. 64% of those with debt worry daily about money compared to just 45% of those without debt. So let me read that again. 64% of those with debt worry daily about money compared to just 45% of those without debt. 39% of those with debt said that they're struggling or in crisis when it comes to their finances compared to 25% of those without debt. So you see, not having debt doesn't mean you won't deal with some of the same situations, but these numbers kind of say really what I thought they would say. That if you have debt, then you're more likely to suffer stress and lack of sleep. Over half of those with debt, 62%, reported that they have difficulty paying bills compared to over a third of those without debt. So 62% of those with debt said they have trouble paying bills. 40% without debt said they had problems paying bills. This goes back to what we have discussed from the very first episode, and that is nobody's exempt from struggles, nobody's exempt from trouble, nobody's exempt from tough times. But in this day and time, if you're saddled with a bunch of debt, you reduce your chances of coming through those tough times unscathed. If you're saddled with extreme debt, it doesn't even have to be extreme debt. If you're just saddled with debt, you really limit the possibility that you can weather a storm. I think it was Warren Buffett who talked about, when the tide is low is when you really find out who's skinny dipping. If you're barely treading, not even considering the fact that you need to save money, you need to get out of debt. Personally, I think it is worth an intense effort to get out of debt. And I know, as I've said before, sometimes people, when I talk about that, sometimes people say, oh, yeah, but you use debt as leverage to build something. Well, I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but you know as well as I do, a lot of the debt you've got, or that we've got, that most consumers have, is not because you're trying to leverage and to build something else. It's just because you've overspent. I mean, it sounds good that you're leveraging it, and that's what people do. But we got to be honest with ourselves and look at ourselves in the mirror and say, you know what? There's a lot of stuff that I'm wasting money on. When it comes to money, you're either spending it, wasting it, or investing it. Those are really the three things you're doing. You're either spending it, wasting it, or investing it. And I think far too many of us are spending more than we're investing. There's no doubt that that is the case. when you look at the numbers, not just this survey that I shared from Ramsey Solutions, but just about anything, any other survey I look at, the numbers are similar to the fact to the point where people start to feel helpless, and as I mentioned, start to lose sleep, and they're stressful, and their children feel the stress, and because it's very difficult when you're in that situation to look as though everything is okay, even though we can sometimes try very hard to do so, admirably so. But that's very difficult to do because it just tends to weigh you down. And even over the last week or so, we've heard there have been several banks in this country. We know about SVB, Silicon Valley Bank out in California, that the feds had to take over because there was a bank run. And one of the primary reasons that this bank got in trouble, number one, their customers weren't typical. Their customers were multi-million dollar startup companies, a lot of them tech companies. They were not mom and pops. And so this bank grew significantly over a short period of time. But you and I know that they don't just sit there and hold your money. Banks make money by using your money. If they didn't do that, they wouldn't be in business. So that's typical for them. They have to do that. You make a deposit, they use your money to get loans on cars and homes and other stuff. But in SVB's case, they invested in a ton of long-term bonds, treasury bonds. And not probably, they did invest too much in long-term treasury bonds. And as interest rates have gone up over the last year, those bonds became worth less and less and less to the point where they have these unrealized losses. In other words, they knew as soon as they're not a loss until you sell. It's just a matter of when they were going to sell because interest rates had risen so much, so significantly that those bonds were worth less than they were when they first bought them, and they were 10 years. So as their customers and investors started to see that, they started to pull their money out of the bank, and that's when the feds had to take over. And when I said as long as they didn't sell those treasuries at a loss, they technically didn't have a loss. But it's kind of like, this one guy I heard was the guy was working on a job, and he was supposed to be working, and they found him asleep in the corner. And the manager went over, and one of the other employees went over, and the employee was getting ready to reach over and wake the guy up. And the manager said, no, 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 don't wake him up. Because as long as he's asleep, he's got a job. But as soon as he wakes up, he's fired. And that's kind of what SVB were. They had these treasury bonds. They knew they would have to, when they sold them, it was going to be at a significant loss. And as soon as they did that, things went downhill from there. So what's the moral of the story? The moral of the story is we have to, when I talk about making wise decisions, we don't ever get too heavy in one particular investment that if that investment suffers, it takes us down. That's where the whole idea of diversification comes in, setting a plan, diversifying your investment so that you don't have all your eggs in one basket. And that way you can weather the storms. I could actually share a chart with you that I actually got from Vanguard. And then the chart just shows year over year which of the investment classes had the biggest returns. And it went from U.S. equities to international equities to U.S. bonds to REITs. It changed just about every year. And that highlights the need for us to diversify our investments and not put all our eggs in one basket. And again, that tactic actually got this bank in big trouble, and them, along with several others, are in trouble at this point. So just keep that in mind, that we want to make sure we don't put our eggs in one basket, and that way we can weather those storms. But this survey that Ramsey Solutions did is quite an eye opener, and it highlights the fact that we have to, it's up to us to take control of our personal finances. We can't run our finances like the government runs their finances. We don't have that luxury to do that. We have to manage our finances and take control. And one of the biggest steps we can take, um, the survey results convey, we have to we have to get ourselves out of all this crazy debt. We really have to get ourselves. And I was talking to somebody the other day, and they're talking about the amount of money that they could find in their budget by cutting back on the number of streaming services they had. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. Okay, do you need 5 different streaming services? If you're in financial struggle right now, that's a great place to start. And there are other examples of things like that that we can do to to focus our efforts on getting rid of unnecessary debt, cutting back on unnecessary expenses. But it takes us. That's not always easy to do, and it's definitely not fun. But it's absolutely worth it. It's worth it for your peace of mind. It's worth it for you to be able to sleep at night. And if you're a believer like I am, it's worth it for you to be able to have money to actually give in church. So whatever church you go to and other nonprofit organizations, it's worth it. But the mental fatigue that comes along with being in a situation where you don't know how you're going to pay people is it's significant. And there are a lot of people dealing with that right now. And so my hope is that you will just do the hard work. Just do the hard work that it's going to take to get out of that situation. It is, again, it's not fun. It's not exciting. It's not the stuff that you might want to post on Facebook. Your social media followers may not be interested. And that's another thing. Let me mention that since I said that, it triggered a thought. I was talking to my brother the other day, and we were just talking about the fact that when you're doing something like this whole topic of personal finance and being disciplined is not something that you may have a lot of people who are just jumping on board. Yes, yes, this is exciting, because it's not exciting. It is not exciting. It is not necessarily fun on one side, but on the other side, it absolutely is. When you can feel yourself, when you can look at, as I mentioned a couple episodes ago, look at your net worth statement and see improvement. See your balance sheet improving, your personal balance sheet improving. That is absolutely exciting. But we were talking about how people who are excellent in anything are not casual. People who are outstanding in anything are not casual participants. Matter of fact, some people might call them fanatics. Some people might call them crazy, or whatever the case may be. But people who are excellent at anything, whether it's an athlete, football player, baseball player, basketball player, whether I don't care if you're playing pickleball, I don't care if you're a seamstress, I don't care if you're obviously a musician or a singer, anybody who's excellent, anybody who's outstanding, anybody who's better than average has a fanatical commitment to whatever it is they're working on and whatever they're interested in. That's in any walk of life. So when you're talking about personal finance, and I mentioned that it's not the kind of stuff that you may want to post on social media, I say that because the truth of the matter is most people are not really interested in doing the work. Most people are not interested in doing the work that it takes to make a significant, dramatic improvement in their personal finance, because it requires discipline that at this point in their lives they're not willing to exhibit. So you have to be okay with that. I have to be okay with that. I had to learn. I am perfectly okay with that now. I have no problem being a deviant. That's the name of the podcast. I have no problem being a deviant because I know for a fact that there are many that may ride by me and their car may make my car look like a junker. But I know for a fact that not everybody, and I'm not saying everybody, don't get me wrong, but I know a lot of people who are riding better, who look the part, and that's it. Because they are absolutely not the part because they are head over heels in debt. But they look great. I became okay a long time ago with being a deviant. And that's why I named the podcast what I named it, because it takes that willingness and that desire to work against the current, to go against the grain, whatever metaphor you want to come up with. It takes that to get where you want to be. And that's just a fact. And I've resigned myself to that some time ago. And if you're going to make those significant improvements, you will probably have to do the same thing. But guess what? There are other deviants out there. You won't be alone. You won't be by yourself. There are other deviants who are seeing the light and saying, okay, there's got to be a better way, because now they're just sick and tired of being sick and tired. They're tired of that weight being around them. They're tired of that anchor being around their ankle. And they're willing to make those changes and those sacrifices to get things in the right order. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode. I had someone text me the other day and ask me if I took ideas for a podcast, and I said absolutely. And as a matter of fact, they made a recommendation, and I'm planning on talking about that probably on the next episode. But so if you guys have any ideas, let me know what they are. I'll be willing to talk about just about anything. If you want my opinion on some stuff, I'll be happy to give it. If there's one thing I'm not short on, that's an opinion. So again, hope you guys enjoyed the episode. I think some of the information that we talked about today can be of value to you. I hope it will be. And until next time, this is the Financial Deviant saying so long.